I've titled the lesson or denominated the lesson this morning as Audacity. It's a bold confidence to step out in faith and act on something, either a belief, a feeling, an emotion. And today I want to talk about each and every one of you being audacious for Jesus. Because He's created each of us to be unique. If you recall, over the past 4 or 5 weeks, I've been talking about issues that really pertain to each of you individually, that we cannot begin to grow this church without God's help, first and foremost. But in addition to that, we can't grow this church without each of you being you. Because I can't be you and you can't be me. But if you will be the best you that you can be, then this church will explode. And that's what I would encourage you now as we start talking about being audacious for Jesus. And the text of the lesson is taken from 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 7. And it says, God doesn't want us to be shy with His gifts, but to be bold and loving and sensible. I want to start off the message this morning by asking you a question. And that is, what is your perception of how God treats you as His child? I mean, do you think that God treats you with the sensitivity of, let's say, a prison guard? If so, if you view God in that way, it ends up guaranteeing daily deliveries to you of just dread. But if, on the other hand, you believe that God cherishes you and loves you like Stradivarius would his violin, then you'll extract your strengths with a considerable amount of joy and opportunity. Jesus made this very point in this dramatic parable of the talents. It has its origin in the first book of the New Testament, Matthew, starting with chapter 25, verses 14 and 15. For the kingdom of heaven is like a man traveling to a far country, who called his own servants and delivered his goods to them. And to one he gave 5 talents, to another he gave 2, and to another 1, to each according to his own ability. And immediately he went on a journey. Now, before talent meant skill as we would use it in today's context, talent was actually money. It represented the largest unit of accounting in Greek currency. And a talent was worth 10,000 denarii. Now, according to the parable of the workers, which is a different parable that Jesus taught in Matthew chapter 20, we know that a denarius represented 1 day's fair wage. So multiply your daily wage by 10,000 and you discover the value of a talent. Now, without being too obtuse, I thought, well, okay, let me be a little bit more practical. Let's just say, theoretically, that you make $30,000 a year. And let's say that you work an average of 260 days in that year. With those assumptions in mind, you make about $115 a day. If you were to multiply $115 a day by 10,000, what would that talent be worth? If you add the zeros, it's $1,150,000. So place this in perspective. Suppose a person earns the same $30,000 a year for 40 years. Then that person's lifetime earnings would be $1,200,000, which is only $500,000 more than the talent in this parable. And what I think Jesus was trying to convey, at least from my perspective, is that 1 talent then equals a lifetime of earnings. And that's a lot of money. And I think that that's the key point in Jesus' parable. Because you see, church, your God-given design and uniqueness has an unbelievably high market value, especially in heaven. I mean, God didn't entrust you with a $2 talent or a $5 skill. Consider yourself a $1 million investment. Consider yourself a multi-million-dollar enterprise. Because our God gives gifts not miserly, but abundantly. And not randomly, but carefully. Because as you noted in the parable of the talents, it said that the master gave to each according to each one's unique ability. That's verse 15. You see, you need to remember that no one has your talents. You are unique. God elevates you from commonhood by matching your unique abilities to custom-made assignments that he has for you each and every day. Now, in the parable that we just discussed, the first two servants rewarded their master's trust, right? Because if you read on in Matthew chapter 25, now verses 16 and 17, it says the following. Immediately, the one who had received the 5 talents went and traded with them and gained 5 more talents. And in the same manner, the one who had received the 2 talents gained 2 more. You see, the 5-talent servant jumped at the task and the opportunity to reward his master. He went and traded money, is what the scripture says. You know, and I imagine this is the kind of guy or woman who goes out and buys investment magazines and watches the Business Channel on TV and takes investment courses at school. You know, a reliable tip here and there leads him to maybe examine some property that might be really valuable but underpriced. He hears about a franchise that's maybe looking for some capital that he can invest in and make a very large return on his investment. He ponders his option. He crunches the numbers. He takes a gulp, and eventually he takes the plunge. And he invests the money. And the second servant showed equal eagerness. He may have only had 2 talents instead of the 5, but he put them to work too. And like the first servant, he negotiated, he traded, and he invested. You see, church, these 2 individuals that Jesus is talking about used their $1 million life as an investment to be given back to God. Both took risks. Both dared to fail. Because who was to say that their investments wouldn't NASDAQ into just virtual pennies as opposed to millions? But they took the chance nonetheless. And their master commended them, because when he returned from his journey, he applauded the 5-talent man. Here's what he said in verse 21 of Matthew 25. Well done, good and faithful servant. You were faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Now, in the story, I tried to describe for you as graphically as possible what a talent is. And here the master is saying, I gave you a few things. But to the 5-talent man, to the 2-talent man, even to the 1-talent man, he had given them millions and millions of dollars. And yet Jesus says, you were faithful over a few things. I will make you a ruler over many things. Just consider that contrast. If $1 million is few, then what do you think a ruler over many means in this parable? But with these words, Jesus permits us, I think, a glimpse into the end of history. You know, that unannounced day in which in 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 10, it says, the earth and all its works will be exposed to the scrutiny of judgment. And at that time, Jesus is going to say, well done to some. And the question for you to ponder is, don't you want to be numbered among those? Don't you want your Lord and Savior to say to each of you, well done, good and faithful servant? I mean, to have your Maker look you in the eyes with all of humanity watching and listening and tell you, you did a good job. I mean, maybe, I don't know about your life, but maybe your father never praised you. Or maybe your teachers always criticized you. But here, your God is going to applaud you. And He'll call you good. And when God says you're good, okay, that counts. Because only He can make bad sinners like all of us good. And only He can make the frail among us faithful. Well done, good and faithful servant. And listen to what the Master, Jesus, doesn't say. He doesn't say, well done, good and flashy. He doesn't say, well done, good and famous. He didn't even say, well done, good and fruitful. He said, well done, good and faithful. So now, having addressed the 5-talent servant, the master then turns to the 2-talent worker. Now, the master has heaped praise on the $5 million man, right? What would he say to the $2 million man? Well, he says exactly the same words. Matthew 25, verse 23. Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord. You see, in the parable, the king who comes back doesn't alter the phrase, doesn't omit an honor. The 2-talent servant who faithfully fills, let's say, soda cups or soup for the needy is the same person who gets the same applause as the 5-talent, let's say, evangelist who fills a stadium full of people. Might be different fruit, but it is still the same equal praise. And the point of it, I think, is that you and I need to use our uniqueness to take great risks for God. I mean, if you're great with kids, then volunteer at an orphanage. If you have maybe a head for business, then maybe open up a soup kitchen. Or if you're bent on medicine, then go to a hospital for a day or work a decade in helping people who have AIDS. The only mistake, church, I think, is not to risk making one. Hear me again. The only mistake is not to risk making a mistake. And that was the error, unfortunately, of the 1-talent servant. Because did the master notice him? Yes, he did. And from the 3rd servant, I think we learn what is actually a pretty sobering lesson. Verses 24 and 25 of Matthew 25. Then he who had received the 1 talent came and said, Lord, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you have not sown and gathering where you have not scattered seed. And I was afraid. And I went and I hid your talent in the ground. And I want you to contrast, if you would, the reaction of this 3rd servant with the first 2. The faithful servants, we know, in verses 16 of Matthew 25, went and traded. That's what it says. But the fearful 1-talent man, verse 18, went and dug. The first 2 invested. The last one buried. The first 2 went out on a limb. The third one's hanging onto the trunk of the tree. He made the most tragic and common mistake of giftedness. He failed to benefit the master with his talent. You know, all people have talents. We all do. And this parable, indeed, Scripture assures us of that very fact. The question then becomes, how many people invest their gifts to the profit of the master? I mean, many may discover their what, and they may actually luck into their where and use their what, but why? Why did God pack your bag as he did? If you're an accountant, how do you explain your ability to just deal so gracefully with numbers? And if you're an investor, I mean, you read the stock market like Bobby Fischer could read a chessboard. Have you ever wondered why you have that skill? Or if you're a linguist, I mean, foreign languages paralyze most tongues like mine, but for you, it liberates your tongue. You can speak multiple languages. Why? And if you're a homemaker, you make your household purr like a Bentley. But why? So people will pay you? So people will love you? So people will admire you, hire you? And the problem is that if your answer involves only you, then you've missed the biggest reason for your gift. And you're making a huge mistake, because sin, at its ugly essence, confiscates heaven's gifts for selfish gain. Let me give you an example. Which one of us hasn't given a needy person some cash, only to see them staggering later in the day from the effects of too much alcohol? And if you're like me, you're just a little ticked. Because you're thinking, you know, I gave him that money to buy food. How could he go out and use the money I gave him to buy it on booze? Is it wrong for me to be upset? Is it wrong for you to be upset? No. Because clearly that person misused the gift that we gave him or her. So is the master wrong to be angry when we do the same? I don't think so. And according to the parable, God is going to be angry. Some invest their talents and give God credit. Others misuse their talent and do nothing but give God grief. Some honor him with the fruit of their life's work. Others insult him with excuses. The one-talent servant did that very thing. He insulted his master. Did you hear him? He said, I knew you to be a hard man. The master is not going to stand for that. So I want you to brace yourself for the force of his response. You wicked and lazy servant, you knew that I reap where I have not sown and gather where I have not scattered seed, so you at least should have deposited my money with the bankers, and at my coming I would have received back my own with interest. And you're thinking, wow, what just happened? Why the blowtorch? You'll find the answer in the missing phrase. The master repeated the assessment of the servant word for word with one exclusion. Did you note it? The master repeated what that one-talent servant had said about reaping where he hadn't sown and gathering where he hadn't scattered seed. Did you notice the phrase that the master omitted in his rebuke? He omitted the statement, I knew you to be a hard man. Because the master didn't repeat a description that he would not accept. The servant levied, essentially, a cruel judgment against the master by calling him a hard man. And I will tell you that if you do a little study of the New Testament and check your Greek, the servant used the exact word for hard that Christ used to describe these stiff-necked Pharisees. And if you don't believe me, you can take a look at Matthew chapter 19, verse 8, or Acts chapter 7, 51. In fact, the writer of Hebrews employed the term to beg readers not to harden their hearts. Hebrews chapter 3, verse 8. So, putting it in maybe slightly different words, the one-talent servant called his master a stiff-necked, stubborn, and hard man. You see, church, his sin was not mismanaging the money. His sin was misunderstanding the heart of the master. I mean, was his master hard? He gave multi-million-dollar gifts to undeserving servants. He honored the 2-talent worker as much as he honored the 5-talent worker. He stood face to face with both of them at homecoming and announced before the audiences of heaven and hell, "Well done, good and faithful servant." Is that a hard master? I don't think so. Our master, church, is infinitely good and graciously abundant, but hard? Not a chance. The problem is that the 1-talent servant never knew his master, although he should have. He lived under the same roof. He shared the same address. He knew his master's face. He knew his master's name, but he never knew his master's heart. And as a result, the 1-talent man broke his master's heart. And the truth is, he could have known the master. The other servants apparently did. He could have at least asked them if he was confused, but he didn't. And in the end, the master instructed in Matthew chapter 25, verses 29 and 30, "Get rid of this play-it-safe who won't go out on a limb. Throw him into utter darkness." And the truth be told, church, false servants populate our master's house. They enjoy his universe. They benefit from his earth. They know his name. They know his habits. They even occasionally frequent his presence. But they never know his passion. And as a result, they misuse their talents. Okay, well then who's this unprofitable servant? Well, let me be blunt with you. If you never use your gifts for God, you are. If you think God is a hard God, then you are. And you'll live a life of buried talents. You'll stick your $1 million skill into a coffee can, you'll hide it in a drawer, and you'll earn nothing for God. Now, you may use your uniqueness to build a reputation, or use your uniqueness to build yourself an entire empire. But you won't build God's kingdom. You may know your story, but the problem is you don't share His story. And your heart's going to grow cold. And for fear of doing the wrong thing for God, you'll just do nothing for God. For fear of making the wrong kingdom decision, you'll make no kingdom decision at all. For fear of messing up, you will miss out. You'll give what this servant gave and hear what this servant heard. You wicked and lazy servant. verse 26. But you don't have to hear that. It's not too late to seek your Father's heart. Your God is a good God. He lavished you with strengths, with abilities, with talents in this life, and has given you a promise of a next life to come. So, church, go out on a limb. Be audacious. He's not going to let you fall. I mean, take a risk here, because he's not going to let you fail. He invites you to dream of the day that you'll feel his hand on your shoulder and his eyes on your face and say, "Well done, good and faithful servant." That's audacity. Don't you want to hear, "Well done, my good and faithful servant"? Don't you want to hear God say that to you? Well, we know from the parable that that's the answer you're going to get if you take the talent that he's given to you and use it. I think it's curious to note that the $5 million man and the $2 million man, they didn't lose a penny. They doubled their money, because they took the talent that God gave them and invested it in the world and in the community in which they lived. And look how it came back abundantly. And the $5 million man and the $2 million man get the identical reward, despite the fact that they had differing results. I mean, one guy invested 5 and got 5. One guy invested 2 and got 2. But they get the same reward. But the one who takes the talent and buries it in the ground and does nothing because he believes that his God is a hard God, then he gets the rebuke. Not because he blew the investment, because he didn't even try. And the reason why he didn't try is because he thought that his God was a hard God. But his God just gave him $1 million to invest. I wouldn't call that hard at all. And so, church, this week, I want you to work on your relationship with God the Father, the Master in the parable. Who do you see God as? Is he this guy that is looking to squish you like a bug when you make a mistake? Or is he a God that loves you unconditionally, who sent his only Son to die for you so that you might live in heaven with him? That's a pretty great God. And if we worship that God, who's not a hard God, then don't you think the talents he's given to each of you, he wants to see you succeed in developing and giving? I think so. That's how a family grows. That's how a church grows. That's how we grow individually. You keep working at the things that you do well. Now, I will tell you, I love to play golf. But I can also tell you that the harder I play at it, typically the worse I get. I don't know why, but I can lay off of it for 3 months and play better golf than if I was playing every week, every week, every week, every week. I don't know. Maybe I wasn't intended to be a golfer. I'll have to live with that. But each of you, church, you've got a unique skill set. You've got unique contacts. You've got unique relationships. I can't be you, and you can't be me. And I don't want to be you, and I hope you don't want to be me. But if you'll just be you, the best you that you can be, then I can tell you that this family will grow. And this church will grow. And this church will be an influence in the community in which we come here to worship. And that just takes you being you and risking what you have for God's kingdom and see if it isn't blessed. And so while we're doing that here on earth, we're thinking about the day when we all get to heaven, which is the song that we're going to be singing next. But church, I just want to encourage each of you. Just be the best you that you can be. Know that you worship and serve a loving, compassionate, forgiving God who wants to see you succeed. Because that way his body grows. And if you will just be the best you that you can be, then you will be able to hear, well done, good and faithful servant. Enter into the place that's been prepared for you from eternity. Let's stand and let's sing.